Well, speaking of voting, we're all going to be doing it on the 1st of November, aren't we, as we take part in the local government elections. The Democratic Alliance is also trying to count on your votes, but it seems they're getting some heavy criticism, especially for the election posters in Phoenix North of Durban. To remind you what they said, the controversial posters reading, and I quote, "The ANC called you racists, the DA called you heroes." Well, some saying those posters were insensitive and even fanning racism. But there's a lot to talk about as far as the Democratic Alliance is concerned. We have only 5 minutes to fit it in, though, with the former leader of the Democratic Alliance, Mr. Tony Leon, joining us to talk about your former home. Hello to you, Mr. Leon. Always a pleasure. So posters, agree with them or disagree with them? How bad a move was that, do you think?
Well, I think in the words of the mayoral candidate in Cape Town, Jordan Hill-Lewis, on your station on Sunday night, it was an unhelpful distraction. I mean, you can argue the toss both ways, but on the objective facts, the DA, by its own acknowledgement, made a mistake with the poster. It rectified the mistake the next day, and it wants to get back to its core message, that they fix things where others have broken them, which seems to me the most sensible offer in the local election to make, and hopefully they will do that. But, you know, there's controversial slogans are not the responsibility entirely of this DA leader. I did birth a controversial slogan in 1999, Fight Back. And in 2009, in her first election, Helen Zille got an enormous amount of flack with the slogan "Stop Zuma," and was, you know, I can read out a list of the wise commentators on social media who said it was a disaster. The party added 1 million votes to its total in that election compared to the election before. So I think you've got to disaggregate what the so-called commentators say and what's yielded in the ballot box. But I think, if I might say this, the DA is held accountable to a standard. Maybe it's correct, it stands itself, which really doesn't apply to any other political party in South Africa. That's just part of the deal here. So, you know, you have Cyril Ramaphosa lambasting them for racial divisions with their slogan. You know, I recall in 2013, Ramaphosa going around Limpopo province and saying, if you don't vote for the ANC, the Boers are going to come back. And when he was tackled on that, he clarified, said, oh, no, I just meant the former apartheid rulers. I didn't mean the Afrikaners. And his clarification was accepted unreservedly by the media. And yet the DA's explanations are never accepted. Anyway, that's part of the deal, and they must get back to their core business of convincing voters. Yeah,
and let's talk about those convincing voters. We saw on the weekend Naledi Pandor, Mr. Leon, making what they believe are some headroads into the Western Cape, especially the Boerkaap region. It seems the DA being taken to task again on the land and housing issue. Fair criticism, or do you think this is just merely politicking a few weeks away from us all making our mark?
Well, it's probably both. I mean, there's a housing crisis here, but in once again, I think it's the DA or the province of the Western Cape, where I'm talking to you from, is a victim of its own success. I heard the Premier, Alan Winde, say the other night that 450,000 people have moved into the Western Cape in the last 8 years. So that's in addition to historical backlogs, that's a huge challenge for any administration. And, you know, I think the Cape Town City Council could do things quicker and better, but, you know, by a country mile, it's still better administered than any other metro in South Africa. And it's not my view or your view, it's what the objective statistics say. If I could use your platform, Gareth, to make one point, to me, the issue that gets no attention in this local election, which everyone should fixate on, was a statement put out by the National Treasury a few weeks ago that municipalities in South Africa, including all the metros, are drowning in debt. There's a 232 billion rand deficit in municipal finances, a big black hole, and yet everyone in this election is ramping up the demand side, and no one is talking about the supply side. Where's the money coming from? And I think that would be a sensible conversation to have in the remaining weeks of this campaign.
Let's talk about as well accountability as well. I know electoral officials and political parties, Mr. Leon, like to go backwards and forwards on holding each other accountable. The move by the DA, Mike Waters, to resign as a result of the the poster issue. I don't want to go back to the poster issue. That's where I'm going from. But it's accountability. Some are going to say that this is an admission of guilt. I imagine the DA are going to say, yes, but this is how we deal with accountability in the party. A good move by Mike Waters or not?
Well, look, I'm not involved in this campaign, so I really can't speak for the DA. And I have very high regard for Mike Waters. He was an exemplary MP when I was the leader of the party. I thought his language was a little extravagant in his resignation statement, but there it is. I think the biggest problem isn't actually accountability or non-accountability. It's when the party makes a decision, good, bad, or indifferent, and you're on the eve of an election, people in the party need to get behind it. There's no good briefing against the party or its leader, either on or off the record. You need to actually back your side and not bomb your own ship. And I'm not talking about Mike Waters here. There was an enormous amount of briefing going on in the Sunday Times by various named and unnamed DA people. And I really think, to quote Jordan Hill-Lewis, that's a tremendously unhelpful distraction. You know, back your side, do your best, and then count the votes on the 1st of November. That's how to run an election campaign.
Well, apart from the trying to defend the position in the Western Cape, how would you view the way the Democratic Alliance is moving around the country? I know Helen Zille in Gqeberha as well. What about the other big areas? Gauteng, we know, has always been a battleground. What about like KZN, for example, Mr. Leon? I mean, how would you suggest the Democratic Alliance tries to make inroads while also trying to fend off down in the Western Cape? You can't do both, can you? You can't play defense and offense at 100% each.
Well, you've got to try to do both, because where you govern, you've got to defend, and where you don't govern, you've got to go on the offensive. And I think the DA's had a mixed record in governance outside the Western Cape, in Joburg, in Tshwane, and in Nelson Mandela Bay, because some of those governments didn't last the 5 years and others were resurrected more recently. So if I certainly am not, if I was running the DA campaign, I would stick to the core message that the DA gets things done, that it governs better than any other party in the country, and that's an objective fact, and that it has an offer to put before the voters, and that's what they need to concentrate on with unrelenting focus, whether it's in Joburg or not. Look, I think for the DA, the critical battleground is Gauteng. That's where most of its voters actually are, never mind the fact that it governs in the Western Cape. And for the ANC, conversely, the biggest problem or challenge it has is KZN. So if the ANC doesn't outperform itself in KZN, it's going to have a problem nationally. If the DA doesn't outperform itself in Joburg and Tshwane, it's also going to have a problem. So I think, if not that I'm giving any strategic advice, if I was the DA, I would concentrate most of my remaining resources on Gauteng, and if I was the ANC, I would be fixated on KZN, because that's going to be the difference for both parties.
Give me your thoughts, Mr. Leon, in the last couple of minutes I have with you. If we have enough time, I might ask you one other question. The leader, John Steenhuisen, seems to get into a bit of a tiff every now and then on social media. I think you know where I'm going. Pumzile van Dam, just a little while ago, and John Steenhuisen, not exactly best of buddies on social media. How damaging is that, or is it an unnecessary distraction that just gets blown over on social media?
Well, look, I don't know. I don't fixate on these things. I actually thought Steenhuisen made a good point when he was asked about this Van Dam story. He said, well, you don't ask Cyril Ramaphosa about Carl Niehaus's tweets. Why do you ask me about hers? I do not think that these are central figures in the party. But of course, what happens is it's very difficult to not get distracted by all the noise and by the instantaneousness of it. Look, I stood down as leader of the DA in the year 2007. That was the same year Facebook was invented, and Twitter was something that birds did at the time. So, the world has changed. It's an unforgiving and unrelenting environment, and you've got to navigate your way through it as best you can. That doesn't mean, you're always going to say the right thing at the right moment. But, I don't want to, to quote George W. Bush, go back to what he called the soft bigotry of low expectations. But I do still find it curious. And once again, people must do what they do, that the DA is held to this extraordinary standard. And maybe that's a good thing, because they prize merit over incompetence. And other people literally get away with murder. I mean, we've got an MEC in Mpumalanga, Mr. Msibi, who's arrested literally for murder yesterday. And that'll be forgotten tomorrow. We have the EFF going into Phoenix and accusing Indians of being racist. And we have Mangosuthu Buthelezi saying actually the folk in Phoenix are heroes. And, everyone just accepts that. So, the double standard is a refrain in our politics and in life. And but the DA's just got to navigate the best it can. Whether they're going to do it right every day, probably not. They're human beings. And I think they've just got to keep their focus going forward to the 1st of November.
Well, I appreciate your time in speaking to us this morning, all the way from Constantia down in the Western Cape. Former DA leader Tony Leon on the South African Morning.